Hello folks, this time we're looking at supporting some STL files in a bit of slicer software for 3D printing. So to 3D print using a resin printer, we have to support the material from underneath so that overhangs such as this area around the buffer beam, anything like that, print properly. So there are a couple of ways you can do this. This bit of software is called Chimney version 1.6 I'm using, but it updates all the time. There are sort of auto settings that you can use, and we'll be doing a little bit of hybrid between auto and manual in this video. Apologies for audio quality, this is a bit taxing on my computer, so you might hear quite a lot of fan noise. And also I'm having to just record through the built-in microphone today, so it's not going to be particularly clear. Hopefully it's all fine, and I'll add some voiceover in the edit if I think it isn't. So, what we're looking at in particular today, I have a selection of bits here. We have a Planet 20-ish horsepower loco. This is a bit of a semi-freelance on my part, so we'll be looking at supporting a full loco. And then we have a whole selection of chimneys and domes and backheads, a couple of toolboxes, smoke box door dart, a few springs, basically lots of bits and pieces. These are all off existing loco kits that I've done, and I'm planning to release a sort of pack of bits for scratch builders and kit bashers and so on. So if there's anything you see in any of my locos that you want, you can probably have it in a pack like this. Just get in touch using the links in the description below. So let's make a start on something well, we've got a lot of chimneys, so let's start with a chimney. Let's pick this one. So a couple of the aims we're looking to do here is to get rid of large flat surfaces. So this section on the loco up here is large and flat. That's going to cause a lot of tension when the printer tries to lift the print head off the film at the bottom of the printer. So to reduce the tension, you can put things at an angle, which then reduces the, so if I just demonstrate quickly with this one, you can put something at an angle like that, which then when you take a flat slice through it will reduce the surface area and therefore reduce the tension. That doesn't matter quite so much for small objects like this, especially if, like a chimney, they're hollow down the middle. So we'll start with the very basic version, which is literally just support it. So when you click on the support icon up here, it lifts it off the base. And we're going to add auto supports here, which I can do by pressing this button here in the auto support section. There we go, let's chuck a load of supports in there. Now that isn't particularly great, is it, by the looks of things? So what I'm going to do is remove all. Now you can see on the settings up here, I've got medium selected. That's not really what I want to do. If you're having trouble printing, medium is a better one to do because the supports are much more robust. But I've got my printer set up reasonably well at the moment, so I'm going to change it to light. If we do auto supporting again, you can see the supports are much smaller, but it's added more of them. Now, let's have a quick look at some of the settings. The top is the sort of section up here where it actually contacts the model, which is why you want fairly small values in here. The middle is the main bulk of it. Doesn't really matter too much, although the thicker it is, the more likely it is to print reliably. Bottom is where it touches the platform, and I've got that set up as a skate at the moment. This is basically so that it puts this sort of raft thing beneath it. This helps quite a lot with the how do you call it, the adhesion to the bed. So you can see it's a solid block at the bottom. That makes it stick much better. So I'm almost happy with some of those, except all of these ones around the outside are slightly unnecessary. So slightly earlier on we were talking about overhang. Now you can see this model doesn't actually have any overhang, but the auto generator on the slicer software is being a bit heavy-handed and adding a load of bits in here that we don't really need. So I'm going to use this tool down here to delete all of these, all the ones that don't have, that aren't actually supporting an overhang essentially. So let's get rid of everything over here. Sometimes it leaves odd bits and pieces in, sort of floating around in space. This is basically what you have to deal with a bit of free software like this. It's good for what it is, but ultimately it's not going to get the same kind of development as a full manufacturer supported item. So there we go. Now we have a chimney fully supported and ready to print, almost. See, it's left a couple of spaces around the edge here, and from experience, I reckon these are going to sort of droop slightly while printing. So the final bit is I'm going to use this add support tool and just add a few more. This underneath view is very good for doing this, sort of right up against the edges there, and that will mean the edges will keep their shape better while printing. So that's that. Go out of the support tool onto the main area tool. Let's tackle one of these toolboxes next. Let's tackle the big one. Actually no, let's tackle the little one first. So this one does have a bit of a flat surface, especially the top, even though it is hollow. So all I'm going to do is just rotate that around a little bit. There are also tools for doing auto orientation and things like that, but I've tended not to use them because they give you all sorts of funky orientations that aren't really compatible with the surface detail that you want on models like this. So let's go back to the tool. You can see because I've got the light supports generated, it auto generates this skate for me. I'm just going to add all to that, and there we go. We can see it's added a couple to that little tiny overhanging section there, so we're going to leave those in place. It's got a couple of supports around the bottom, and I reckon we might need a couple more. So I've still got the add support tool selected, so I'm going to add one over there and one over there. That will do for that. Now in this sort of pack I want a couple of these to go in each pack, so I'm just going to click clone current model and it will clone it with all the supports and stuff generated as well. So the next thing to look at, let's have a go at this back head over here. That's a slightly more complicated piece, and we have a load of surface detail on this side and none on the back there. So that makes the obvious way to rotate it is lean it back like this. That gets rid of, so if you think it's printing up vertically this way, that essentially means these are no longer overhanging, so we don't need to put any support material on those, which means the detail should come through much better. Now, auto support again, add all. Takes a little bit longer because it's a more complicated model, and it's added a couple around there. I'm going to get rid of this one, which I think is unnecessary, but it's nice to have this one in place because that's quite a long extent otherwise. I'm going to get rid of those two as well. There's a very slight overhang, but I think we'll get away with that on that part. Actually, there's no overhang because this pipework takes it up there. Have a quick look from underneath to make sure it hasn't missed any bits. I think that's okay. And there we go. So the rest I will go through and do in a second, hopefully speed that bit of footage up. The process is pretty much the same for all of these. Things like springs, you can orientate this way up, and then the non-detailed side is down and the detailed side is up. Let's see what it adds in the way of supports there. So this should be pretty good and shouldn't actually need very many supports, and it hasn't got very many. That should be absolutely fine. Although I will just add another one there. So I'm going to clone those, have a few of those floating around. This is a smokebox door dart. It's a little bit overscaled due to the tolerances unique in 3D printing, but what can you say? For a thing that cost me basically nothing in resin, it's not bad at all. So I'm going to orientate it that way up, and then hopefully I shouldn't have to have supports on this section. And I want to rotate it around that way very slightly as well, so that this arm shouldn't need any help either. Put that in, auto generate supports. What have we got? 3, that's not bad at all. I don't think I need to touch that. And the final main bit to do, and the tricky bit really, is this loco. So let's just move some of these other chimneys and domes and things out of the way. So we start by, oh, I haven't got the loco selected, that's not a good start. So we start by changing the orientation slightly. I'm going to move it up this way because there's more detail on the front here than there is on the back. So getting supports and things out of this bit is going to be trickier than getting them out of that. I reckon an angle of about that should be okay. If you think about taking slices this way, all the slices there are going to be fairly thin. I mean, the loco is hollow underneath, so there's no massive surface areas on here. And I'm going to start with the auto support. You can see that it adds in quite a few things up here that aren't necessary. There's a couple of little bits of supporting here where it picks up on rivet detail and things like that, which don't actually need support. So I'm going to take those off. I'm going to take all of these off up here. So they're also not necessary. Move all those. Again, it's picked up on all the rivet detail at the back. So that lot needs deleting. Same on the dumb buffers here. So look, it's picked up more of a detail there, there, and there. And those two. But these supports are needed on the bottom of the buffers because there is an overhang on this end, not on the other end, but on this end. So if we have a look underneath, that hopefully removes the scape in this view. This is where we have to start adding extra bits and pieces to the ends, because otherwise these will start to curl up. There isn't sufficient support there. Same thing needed for the ends of the main buffer beams. Let's have a look and see if they've done the same thing at the front. So you can see there's not a lot of support on this front buffer beam at all. There's some at the back here. We could do with a bit more up front. And get rid of those spare bits as well. So we could do some more in a couple of the bare areas here. But this bit, okay, this is what I mean. So you can see there's no support here on this corner at all. That means that is going to curve up here, and it's going to look horrible. So I'll add another couple of supports right in the corners, and that should do us for this model. So there's a load more tweaks I need to go through and do on this. Tiny bits and pieces, remove all these. I'm surprised it hasn't put anything in here, but that's good, I suppose. More bits contacting the wheels down, the bearing carriers down here, and more rivets. So we'll go through and sort all those out. But those are the basic principles that I use for sorting out things like this, so I'm going to go through and finish off the rest of these. And then we're all done. All we have to do after that is save it out. So We go into settings here. I've got a profile set up for the Anycubic Photon. This is basically a default profile it comes with. These are very easy to find online as well if you want different profiles. So all of this detail is related to the machine, so we don't need to change that at all. The resin gives you an idea of how much it's going to cost. And the print settings, this is the main things that you actually have to change. There's also infill, which I tend not to bother with because I hollow out my models beforehand, so I don't need that, and anti-aliasing. Again, doesn't make a huge difference. This is where the main difference comes in. So, layer height, personal preference, it's a compromise between print speed and the amount of detail you get. I find 0.04mm is good enough usually. Bottom layer count is something that helps with your print adhesion and rigidity. So this is the first few layers that it prints of that scape down there. Those layers are exposed for longer than the standard layers, if you see the difference between these two timings here. This means the bottom layers are much more rigid and stick much better to the base. So I find these settings are good for the green resin that I use, although I have to change these settings basically every time I get a new resin bottle, and it takes a few failed prints and experiments to work out exactly what those need to be. These two settings don't really make very much of a difference on the setup I'm using, so I tend to ignore those. Bottom lift difference, distance even, is how much it lifts between each of these bottom layers, and standard lift distance is how much it lifts between each of these standard layers. You can see this one is slightly higher. That's because the resin sticks a little bit better on the bottom distance due to the higher exposure time. So that means it stretches the film at the bottom of the tank a bit more. So you need to come up a bit further to release it, make sure everything's released properly. These settings are a bit high and conservative. That's just because I'm used to using fairly old bits of film and so on, and they get less and less tense, and you have to go higher and higher to get the film to release properly. And the lifting speeds, again, not a massive difference really, it just affects how long the prints take in total. So those are the settings I'm happy with, and I'll go back and do this bit again once I've supported everything properly. But the final step is to slice it. This usually takes a while, depends on how complex your models are. I've got lots of models in here, so it's going to take a little while. And this is the process of it, taking those details you've put into the settings, so the 0.04mm layer height, and it's looking at this and cutting it into slices this way of 0.04mm at a time. So this is the processor intensive part. You can probably hear my fans just fired up even more than it usually is. And it takes quite a while to do this. Again, bits of commercial software will do this quicker and less processor intensive, but for a free bit of software, you can't really complain too much. It's really got going now. So let's just have a look at a couple of these other bits and a couple of the difficulties you might face with those. So there's this one here, which has a gap here. So we're going to need to put a support in there at some point. And there is also a bit sticking out the end, so that's going to need a separate support as well. This normally isn't too difficult because the lightweight supports that I've chosen are thinner than this material here. If I was using the medium supports, they might well be thicker than this, at which point I'd have to start worrying about removing the support material and having it snap some of this when I'm trying to remove it. So that is another consideration you have to make. Some part of the reason I haven't supported these ends on this spring, because if you put a hefty enough support here, try to snap it off, this bit here is going to become your weak point, not the end of your support. So this is the reason the supports, so you can hopefully see here, are tapered at the end to try and make sure they come off as cleanly as possible. But in my experience, they always leave a bit of material behind afterwards that you have to file off. So that is the other reason for taking so much time to go through a loco like this. This is a very simple one, so it's actually been very easy to do. More complicated locos take a lot longer to do than this. I can spend sort of an hour supporting some of these sometimes. But yeah, the main reason we do that is so that we don't have to try and clean up supports on this surface while trying to leave all this detail intact. Because then you'll end up sanding off bits of detail or leaving bits of support visible when you paint it and so on. And the main reason for having this end up here is because A, there's lots of rivet detail, so it hasn't tried to support it because it's facing up, it's not an overhang, and B, because of this sort of grill effect in here, which is the other part that it might try and complain about. So we're going to leave this now to finish off its job. The plan is to do the rest of this in fast motion so you can see what's going on, and then finally show the slice, which actually I think I can do from here if my PC will let me. So you can see how the printer is going to build this up. The first layer will look something like that, and it will build it up layer by layer, and you can see, particularly on the loco at the moment, how we haven't got a large flat surface area there. Whereas if we rotated it around so it was flat, we would have a couple of large flat surface areas, and it would put more stress on the machine and on the film than necessary. It would still probably print, but it means we'll run out of, or we'll wear out the film and so on quicker. So now it's finished slicing, and we can see the actual images it's going to send to the LCD screen in the printer as it builds up from top down. So if we look at the bottom, it puts our nice big flat surface areas in. I know we said we don't like those, but you do need them for adhesion. And then it builds up and up into the models like that. The other thing we need to think about, just before I close this off, is the positioning of these on the bed. So you want to try and get a roughly even step across, so there's no particular stress in one area than the other. So if there's a big section, try and put that in the middle, and then sort of dot everything else around it in a roughly even manner. What you don't want is something like this, where you've got loads of stuff down one end and nothing down the other. It's just going to put uneven wear on your film and so on. So yeah, I think I'll call that a day for this section of the video. I'm going to go through and redo the rest of these, and then we can see how it turns out. So thanks for watching. If you want any more info on some of the models we've featured in this clip, do have a look in the description. It'll take you to the website, and there's various contact methods on there. Thanks for watching.